Thank you. I appreciate everyone for being here today. So I'm going to introduce my panelists. To your far right is Mr. Rodney Barnes. Rodney Barnes is an award-winning writer, producer, and comic book creator whose vibrant and emphatic creative voice has established him as a Hollywood mainstay. Barnes is currently an executive producer and writer for HBO's Winning Time, The Rise of the Lakers Dynasty, which chronicles the professional and personal lives of the 1980s Showtime Lakers during the team's wild and fast-paced golden years. Rodney's appearance is made possible in part by the strategic partnership grant from the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. Also with me here to my immediate right is Mr. Rob Guillory, who is an Eisner Award-winning American comic book artist. Born, raised, and currently based in Lafayette, Louisiana, Guillory is most known for his 8-year run on Image Comics' Chew. The book went on to achieve much success, winning 2 Harvey Awards, including Best New Talent for Guillory, 2 Eisner Awards, and having been translated into a dozen or so languages. Guillory is a writer and artist on his hit creator-owned series, Farmhand, from Image Comics as well. And his appearance is also made possible by the Strategic Partnership Grant from the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. Cool. So I'm gonna give a quick overview of how the panel is gonna go. I'm gonna give a brief introduction to what Afro-pessimism is for the uninitiated, as well as provide some questions for my panelists here, and then we're gonna open the floor for you all to ask your questions. So here's my introduction. Afro-pessimism, simply put, Afrofuturism, sorry, I'm a pessimist. The Freudian slip. Look, I have questions for you. All right, so Afrofuturism, simply put, reimagines the future through a Black cultural lens. It is both an artistic movement and theoretical framework that is commonplace in various forms of literary practices, from visual arts to music to comics. According to Tasha Womack, author of Afrofuturism, The World of Black Sci-Fi and Fantasy Culture, Afrofuturism embodies many elements of science fiction, historical fiction, speculative fiction, fantasy, Afrocentricity, and magic realism with non-Western beliefs. Before the term Afrofuturism was coined by Mark Deary in his 1993 essay, Black to the Future, Black writers and intellectuals alike were already exploring this concept of how to escape the confines of Blackness and oppression by utilizing aspects of science fiction. With a growing interest in comic books and Afrofuturism in today's popular culture, it provides creative approaches for generating discourse centering identity, technology, and fantasy. During this panel, I look forward to facilitating a fruitful discussion about Afro-pessimism and its cultural significance. So welcome. So yes, my first question is pretty simple, and it's for the both of you. So what prompted you to become a comic book writer? And talk us through that process of, figuring out that this was your passion.
You go first. Okay. I don't know, I entered it more from the art side of things. I mean, I'm an artist and a writer. I've always had a particular bent toward that kind of creative expression. And I mean, I was exposed to comics, specifically comics as a really young kid. I had a couple of uncles who were like the prototypical comic book geeks of the 80s. You know, they were collectors, you know, to the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and they had this giant suitcase full of comics every time. Before I even started reading, I would just go rifle through their stuff. So I just fell in love with that medium. So I've always wanted to do it, but I mean, growing up, I grew up here, so like I didn't know exactly how to do it. Mm-hmm. You know, there wasn't really the internet or anything like that. So I kind of thought, you know, that I'd heard stories of, you know, you mailed in your portfolio to New York City somewhere, and some nameless person would like hire you or not. Maybe you get your art back. I didn't know how it worked. I had no idea.
Right.
But eventually, the internet came into being. I got more information and kind of leaned into it, and it seemed to have worked out. But this is really the only thing I've ever wanted to do, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think for me, because I worked in television and film, where there are a lot of rules and a lot of people tell you what to do, I wanted to create an exercise of writing that was just pure, and just something that was connected to something I was emotionally attached to without having someone come in and really tell me I had to change it or alter it in some way. And like Rob, comic books have been a part of my life, my entire life. And so a lot of times you go to comic books first and then film and television. For me, I reverse engineered it. I was film and television and then comic books. But it's a great exercise for me as a writer to be able to stay active, as a practice. But it's also something that connects to my heart as well, and just a way to stay creative.
Beautiful, and both interdisciplinary as well. Cool. So my second question, focusing now on Philadelphia and Farmhand, can you provide an overview of what those stories are about, alongside what it encourages readers to think about?
Well, Farmhand is a story of a farmer, a black farmer from Louisiana named Jedediah Jenkins, who grows human organs. It's a sci-fi dark comedy kind of thing, and he basically uses it it's plug and play organs for transplants. So he's basically healing the world, make a lot of money while he's doing it, but of course there's more to it, and it goes horribly wrong, as it has to.
Mm-hmm.
But it's family drama, sci-fi commentary on really, I think, what healing means and what does that really entail. As far as like what I want the audience to think about it, it's a really hard question. I think that Farmhand is more of, I can't think about that, to be honest with you. Like, I don't think of the audience, this may sound weird, I don't really think of the audience when I'm reading these things. I actually, this is total side story, but whenever I first started having any type of realization that people were actually reading my work, it freaked me out completely. So I actually couldn't produce, like the first Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con I went to after my previous book, Chew, came out, and the first time I had a table of people waiting to for me to sign their work, it freaked me out so badly that when I came back here to Louisiana and got in my studio in front of my drawing desk, I completely could not produce. So I wrote a Post-it note that said, "There are new fans." And I keep it to this day. I can't really write for other people. I have to write for me first, which sounds selfish, but I tend to think if I'm writing from an honest place where I am, then it will connect with people. But I can't start with other people first in that respect. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that typically is how I produce.
Yeah, as a Louisianan, I will say that I definitely connected with Farmhand because of all of the Louisianan, traditions and culture that was embedded in it. And I do have a question about that, but I was also interested too, are there any other comics like that about Louisiana that's so hyper-specific?
I don't think so, which is probably part of the reason I wanted to make it. I mean, I'd never seen anything, well, typically the South is represented one way. And it was not the South that I grew up with, I've had friends who come from the North down here, and they're amazed we're wearing shoes. It's like they're amazed, they're they're amazed even racially and diversity-wise at how culturally mixed we are. I grew up in that. My family is super. I didn't realize how diverse my own family is until I married my wife, and she came over for Thanksgiving and saw. Like, oh wow, your family is like a rainbow. Yeah. And it's just, I grew up in that. So I represent that in the work, and it's never jarring to me, but apparently it can be jarring to folks who don't live in it. So and I've never seen that, so.
And that was the first time I've seen, just myself and my culture represented in that way. And then yes, Mr. Barnes, can you tell us about Philadelphia?
Yeah, so people are dying in Philadelphia, and in mysterious ways, a homicide detective believes that there's more to it than just conventional death or murder. And he's on the trail of a serial killer, and he ends up dead. His son comes back to close out his affairs. He finds his father's journal, and he finds that his father believed that the serial killer he was after was a vampire. He goes down a rabbit hole of investigation, and he finds out that not only was his father correct that it was a vampire, but it was John Adams, the second president of the United States.
It blew my mind too.
So if John Adams killed his father and he was a vampire, then it's a good chance that his father's a vampire. So he digs up his father, opens the coffin, and his father says, "What took you so long?" And the two of them begin a journey of trying to stop John Adams and his legion of vampires to take over Philadelphia and by proxy the world.
Yes, amazing. Yes, so for my next question, this is also towards both of you. From the works we're discussing, Philadelphia and Farmhand, you each have different methodologies when it comes to dealing with the elephant of the past. Mr. Barnes digs deeply into the past to provide a contextual future. Meanwhile, Mr. Guillory has dynamic Black characters who exist within their own universe that decenters the historical past. Afrofuturism is a safe space where creators can explore both ends of the spectrum. Mr. Barnes, you're more so an Afro-pessimist in my book, but can each of you elaborate on the approaches to the past you've taken in your work and why?
Well, for me, we wrestle with critical race theory, I guess now is what it's called. And for me, it's just omitting history. And I wanted to use history as a way to deal with trauma and how people actually felt, and not so much just a marker for history. I wanted to actually make characters who had felt what it was like to have gone through slavery and Jim Crow and all of these different things, and carried that weight with them into the present. And vampires being immortal, it was a way of dealing with, that whole thing. So, is it pessimistic? Perhaps. I think it has a lot to do with just how history can kind of be distorted and played with, and it's almost like religion in a way. You can tell the version of it that you want to tell to do what you want, power-wise, and dealing with a group of people. I come from Annapolis, Maryland, and it's a slave port. It's where the Kunta Kinte landed, they say. They have a monument. Some people say it's not true. Some people say it is. But I see how the history of slavery still affects people to this day, and that there's a sense of apathy. And I just wanted to be able to connect emotionally to that, and how the past and the future sort of intersect in some of these stories.
I'm not crying at your response,
It's
Mr.
all right.
Barnes.
I'm a pessimist.
No, like something's in my eye. Cool. So, and I'll also describe Afro-pessimism as a kind of nearsightedness to the past. And your work definitely does that. And yes, Mr. Guillory, could you lead us through your approach to the past that you've taken in your work and why?
So if Rodney's the pessimist, am I the
You're the optimist.
Yes.
I'm okay with that. I don't know. Just to be completely honest, when I was making Farmhand, it was my first outing as a writer-artist. So I do everything in the book. And I knew that this would be sticky. Because I didn't want, to be honest with you, I didn't want to make Farmhand about race. And I knew that I was making, just by virtue of being a Black creator, who's making a book with a predominantly Black cast, in the time that I was releasing the book, which was also 2018, when everything was race-centric. And I didn't want Farmhand to be that. I kind of grappled with, how do I make this a book that isn't pigeonholed into being the Black book for Black people? I didn't really want that. I just wanted to make a universal book built on universal themes that everyone can enjoy. So I really wrestled with how do I acknowledge the past without being shackled to it.
Right.
And I think the way I did that in Farmhand particularly, it does take place in the South. The main character I said is a Black farmer in the South who owns land. He's multi-generational, which just by nature
It's loaded.
Is loaded.
Yes.
Even the image of the first cover is a Black farmer in the field. And just that image I knew would be very provocative. Because I knew it would immediately, people would have feelings about it.
That's exactly my experience with that text. And I did notice you were very subtle in how you did it in terms of the images in the book. And there was one scene of a protest that was in like a slither of a page. And it maybe took up an eighth of that page, but the rest of the book was within this imaginary that had nothing to do with that historical past.
Yes. I knew that I wouldn't need to go into it very much. It's just because of the nature. I knew that I was building on a tapestry that was already there. Everyone knows the South's legacy. I don't need to go into it. So I knew that I could build the family and focus on the family drama, which is really what the book is about, without even needing to say anything, because we all know. It's like if I was making a superhero story, I don't need to go into exactly what superheroes are. We all know. So I kind of, it's sort of a cheat. I didn't really need to get into it, but it wasn't until issue 11, the very third trade, that I actually got into the racist past of the town where it takes place. It takes place in Freetown, Louisiana, which is a real place. This is just kind of an extrapolated version of it. But I mean, the mythology of the entire book is that Freetown was, in the real Freetown, theoretically is supposed to be this. It was an oasis in the South, in the middle of a really racist, Klan, empowered area, where basically it was an old plantation that was given over to abolitionists. They bought it. I forget the story, but abolitionists came into possession of it, and it became sort of a womb for newly freed African Americans to go and learn a trade, be educated, and then to go out and build lives for themselves. And I thought that's really powerful. And it was even more powerful because, in theory, it seems to have been racially integrated. I mean, people came down from Canada, white folks came down and were actually actively, giving these people tools to live. I thought that's really powerful. So the backstory that is that the one of the founders, who's the farmer Jedediah's great-great-grandfather, was lynched. And basically that lynching sort of plants the seed for the bitterness that soils everything later in the book. So that's the mythology of the entire thing. And it was always there, but I wanted to wait 11 issues to build to it. So, because if I did it in issue 1, everyone would think, oh wait, this is a book about slavery.
It's a race book, yeah.
It's a race book. No, it's the deep root of it, but it's not about that. So it's that I struggle with that issue more than anything else. And I got a lot of counsel on that. Like, there's a writer friends of mine, like, hey, what do you think about this? Let's talk about this. So it's tough.
Fascinating. Cool. Also, that Freetown, is that within Lafayette, or is that like a separate?
In the book?
Yes.
It's its own place.
It's its own place.
Yeah.
But you said it's a real place.
Yes, it's in Lafayette, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The right Freetown I was thinking.
Yeah.
Cool. So my question number 4 is for you, Mr. Barnes. So while all of the characters in Philadelphia are fascinating and strange, I was particularly taken by Jasmine, the 200-year-old slave girl vampire who craves retribution. How did this character come about, and why did you give her such a strong presence? And then also, what is the relationship there between revenge and eroticism?
I think it's a good question. I mean, for me, the idea of anger is corrosive. And I think when you think about generational trauma, anger is an aspect of that, even if you don't understand it. And I think sometimes in people, you can have something traumatic happen to you early in life, and you can develop habits and behaviors that go with it. And even if you no longer remember the thing that happened a long time ago, you can still carry all of that weight through life, and the habits stay with you, and it's just a way that you start to navigate your life. I think that happens generationally as well. It's something that's handed down time after time.
That's powerful.
And I wanted to have a character that sort of embodied that rage, and it was just a part of their personality now. And I think it distorts the past sometimes. Your ability to just see things as they are, not necessarily how they feel. And a lot of times when I see issues in inner cities or within our culture, I think a lot of that has to do with unresolved hurt. And so being able to talk about that, again, the purpose of Philadelphia is to talk about things that we've carried through history that affect us to this day. I wanted to have a character that sort of embodied that.
Very powerful. And also, have you done research, or do you know much about the conversation of Black rage, or that concept?
Some, just through the studies that I've had to do for different things and different shows and different characters. and how it manifests, because you want to present it in such a way that it's responsible and it still deals with human psychology and not so much just my own personal beliefs. So I've done some, but not to the point where, it's that detailed.
Cool, thank you.
You're welcome.
And then this next question is for the both of you. So Barnes's Philadelphia and Guillory's Farmhand have settings, Louisiana and Philadelphia respectively, that are culturally informing the text in profound ways. Can you both provide more insight as to why you chose these locations and how they are ideal for the creation of these kinds of stories?
Well, for me, for Philly, I remember as a kid, we went on a field trip from Maryland to Philadelphia. And you see like the Constitution, and you see the Liberty Bell, and you see all of these, iconic images that are connected to the formation of American democracy. But then if you go down Kensington Boulevard, you see the junkies, and you see the Badlands, and you see all of the hurt, which is a part of it as well. And I felt like you could look at the idea of what America should be by these stories, and the colorful red, white, and blue. But then you can look at the reality at the same time. And I wanted to tell a story that was in a setting to where both of those ideas were present. The idea of freedom is a great one, but actualizing that idea is another thing altogether. So being able to tell a story that sort of embodied that, I thought Philadelphia was the right place.
Cool, thank you.
Well,
Yeah, I feel like I already touched on this somewhat. A lot of it was just, some of it because, I grew up here. This is home. And it always felt like, I don't know, like Louisiana just feels kind of haunted for me.
Especially New Orleans and Lafayette, since I visited there too.
There's a level of just stuff under the surface. And Farmhand's a book about farming. So obviously, that of blood, there being literal blood in the soil was so rich. And it came out of, again, wanting to kind of tap into sort of what Rodney was talking about, tapping into history, tapping into kind of a historical vocabulary that we all sort of know. But also, Farmhand, again, is a family drama. It's all about making peace with the past, owning the past. Again, generational trauma. It's also a very personal story for me. It's not like, I wouldn't say it's a one-to-one biography. It's definitely not a one-to-one biography, but there's a lot of my life I'm working through in the context of the book. So I couldn't see this taking place anywhere else. Yeah.
Thank you. So then I want to transition to talking about the other texts that we're here for too, Mosley and Blackula. If you could just lead us through the plot as you did with Philadelphia and Farmhand.
For Blackula, I saw the movie, the original, the 1972 Blackula, when I was like 8 or 9 years old. My mother took me to see it. And up until that point, I loved the Hammer films and the Universal Monsters, but I never saw black people in it. So this was a different experience where black people talk back to the movie, and it affected me in a very visceral way. And so as I got older and I revisited the movie, I saw some of the problematic elements, when Prince Mamuwalde became a vampire, his afro got bigger and his lapels got bigger. And it was almost like he got blacker and he became a vampire. And I was like, okay, the late great William Marshall, who played that character in the movie, was really a great actor. He was a Shakespearean trained actor, played Othello on Broadway. And to me, he was as good as playing that character as Bela Lugosi was playing Dracula. So in the back of my mind, I always had this goal of, if I could elevate the idea of him to a prestigious place, like put him on a pedestal, in the same way those monsters, predators, creatures were put on, then that would be something worthy of doing. So revisiting it and sort of extricating the stuff that was in the movie that to me didn't work as well, while still honoring the parts that did. Because I think a lot of blaxploitation were actors doing the best that they could with the material that they were given. It was almost like soul food. Like we took the scraps and we seasoned them and we made them into a delicacy. And I think a lot of blaxploitation was that. So I wanted to take the next step for me creatively. And it's about Prince Mamuwalde wakes up 200 years, not 200, I guess from 1972 to today. And he wants revenge on Dracula for making him a vampire. And the whole book is about him trying to find Dracula, but in a way trying to find his own sense of purpose in today's world, juxtaposed to the world of 1972, juxtaposed to the world back in the early, I think it was 1700s, in a movie where he was going to Dracula to help stop the slave trade, because Dracula was a dignitary and he was hoping that Eastern Europe could help with that. And he was betrayed and turned into a vampire. I thought revenge, you know, even as much as I love Scream Black and Scream because of Pam Grier and Richard Lawson and all these great actors, I always felt like if someone did that to me, I would want revenge on that person. So, and I felt like pitting Blackula against Dracula was kind of, you know, a cool idea as well.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, Mosley. Mosley is basically my guilty pleasure book. It's the book I made in reaction to Farmhand, because Farmhand is such a dense, heavy, and emotional. Like it takes a long time to make. I needed something that was the exact opposite, and that's Mosley. Mosley is straight up action. It's straight up sci-fi.
Definitely got that from it.
100%. I wanted to make like a popcorn flick movie, in a comic. So the basic premise is Marvin Mosley is an ex-Marine. He's part of this scientific experiment project called the Human Progress Project. They're basically training artificial intelligence, and he does it in the hopes that AI will create a future for his young daughter. Jump 30 years in the future, it went horribly wrong, as they also tend to happen. The robots have taken over the world. They're basically being worshipped as gods, and Marvin is a janitor at a high school, so he's completely miserable. And his daughter is actually working for the robots that he helped create. So he's miserable, and he actually has sort of a near-death experience in which he encounters some potentially supernatural being that gives him a giant hammer and says, go free the people. So he's basically Marvin Mosley versus the robots. It's a giant action movie comic that's an absolute guilty pleasure. I had a blast making it.
I love it. Thank you. Mr. Guillory, this question is for you. What does technology represent in Mosley and Farmhand, and how do these texts compare in their attitudes about technology, and how do they differ? So I feel like they had two very different attitudes about technology and what it meant.
I don't know if they're that different. I think they're pretty similar.
Talk to us, yes.
General distrust. I mean, like, I'm not like I have tech. I like tech to an extent. What I don't trust is I don't trust us with tech. I don't trust people to ever know the limitations and to ever know where the boundaries are supposed to be. So with Farmhand, the seed technology that the farmer creates that grows body parts, you know, he says it's for healing people, but really it's coming from a place of pride and hubris and wanting to prove to people that he is better than that he's special. It's about him, and that's why it goes horribly wrong. And with Mosley, it's sort of the same thing. It's a bit deeper without spoiling it. It comes from a place in Mosley of basically both books have a spiritual, supernatural thing going on in both of them. Because I think that technology, who said it? I feel like it's in a Marvel movie or something. That magic and technology are just kind of like synonyms. I think in Mosley that is especially the case, where magic and technology, the supernatural and technology are very close. And I think in both books, it's a lack of human awareness and self-awareness that makes technology dangerous.
Okay. I do have a question about that marriage between technology and mysticism or mythology, but I do want to get to a question for Mr. Barnes. So what are some of the major differences between Philadelphia and Blackula, from character development to major takeaways? What are some of the nuances that you're presenting across the works?
I think Philadelphia is about politics, culture, I guess to a degree race, but who we become as a society, you know. Blackula is just fun. It's much like what Rob was saying about his book. I wanted to go back and create a book that was true to genre and competitive with genre in its natural state, and not necessarily have to add all of these layered thoughts and elements. I just wanted a vampire book that was fun, and because I think oftentimes for creators of color, there's this responsibility that you have to be heavy-handed, and this has to mean something. Everything has to mean something, and I would like to be able sometimes to just tell a story that's fun, that's connected to the things that I was interested in as a kid. And a lot of those movies, even though horror has been a great vehicle to be able to talk about a lot of different things. In the 70s, you had a lot of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Dawn of the Dead, a lot of movies that were connected to consumerism and Vietnam and these different things. Every once in a while, I think, well, I'll say for creators of color again, just to be able to have fun.
Yes.
And to tell a story that's just a story. And the characters are driving it based upon their wants or their desires or their needs, without necessarily having to weigh it down with the other stuff.
Thank you. And I love how Mosley does that for you, and Blackula does the same work in terms of that Black joy, or just joy. And so, yeah, my next question is, you mentioned horror. How are you conceptualizing horror within the context of both your works?
I actually don't like horror. I don't like scary movies. I think of it totally as it's a tool, and it's a super effective tool. But I mean, I grew up probably watching way too many horror movies. And, I think it scarred me some. So now, but it's a muscle that, because I grew up with it, I know how to flex really well. But it's all about, when do I reach into the toolbox and use that one? But I think of it, I think my strength is going between genres, going between, I can switch, especially with Farmhand, where within a page, I'll go from horror to humor to like some kind of drama, like all within the context of one page. And I think, for me personally, I don't really view them all as, I view them as separate tools, sort of, but it's kind of life. I mean, life's kind of that way. I mean, life doesn't break down along like genres.
Yeah.
It's all sort of a whole. It's a spectrum that you sort of go in and out of. And I kind of write that way. And horror is just one part of that.
Yeah, and moods as well. Like, moods are not monolithic. Exactly. And so it's kind of like painting with different, colors and, contrast, all of that.
It's just knowing when to use what tool.
Yeah. Thank you. And then Mr. Barnes.
Similar to what Rob was saying, I mean, I think that there's a thing with horror, except I love horror movies. I think that horror, for me, was always about stakes, and there's a nature of unpredictableness, which isn't a word, within the narrative. It could be supernatural, it could be horror, just like Silence of the Lambs. There's a lot of different ideas of what horror is. But at the end of the day, life and death are the stakes. And so to be able to tell a story that feels important, if you present, it's funny, I had an opportunity, I went to dinner with Stephen King once, and he was telling me about, as I was asking for tidbits and thoughts and ideas, and he was saying that if you could, everybody looks at me for the guy that creates the monster. It's really about getting people to fall in love with the protagonist and to see themselves in that person. And if you can do that, it could be a kitten that's after him. You don't want anything bad to happen to that person. If you can make a really scary monster, you have an effective horror story. And I always thought that as, a community that isn't always seen as being as human as other communities, if I could create a sense of humanity within my protagonist, that I could do a very similar thing too. But we aren't always seen as equally human in things. We're seen as an idea sometimes. So if I could escape that and get to a place where my characters were more human and they feel like your brother or your uncle or your sister or your mom, then I was doing something other than just telling the story. I was adding a degree of humanity to the narrative and moving the needle.
Yeah.
So I thought horror was really effective in being able to do that.
Yes. Thank you. I didn't ask the most important question because we ran out of time, but that's what is Afrofuturism and why is it important to you? But one of you can answer that question.
Okay, Rob. I know Rob can answer. I can't wait to hear Rob. Come on, Rob.
I don't know. I don't know.
Damn, Rob.
Well, I mean, I think, I mean, again, I'm no scholar, but I mean, I do, I mean, with Farmhand, with Farmhand specifically, I think that's probably the book that I have that maybe most fits into that category.
Mm-hmm.
I think all I was really trying to do was paint a vision of the future. Yes, paint a vision of the future, but I think where I just came to is that no matter what, the future is always going to sort of resemble the past. Because people are always going to be people. I don't know if that's helpful at all.
It is. It absolutely is.
But that's where I kind of came to. Like, I just came to, like, when I look at people today and I look at people in the past, I don't feel like they've changed that much. I just feel like our attitudes about things have shifted, but our essential problems are the same, and they're human problems. And that's typically what I focus on more than anything else. I tend to focus on, I mean, that's why my books are so character and emotion, and again, it's going back to eternal, universal themes. So I don't know how that fits into Afrofuturism, but I am an optimist.
Yeah,
Okay, I was gonna say.
I just don't think I don't think I've made any work that necessarily looks into the future, trying to predict where Black people as a race will be. I don't think I have that.
Yeah.
I think that I'm just looking at humanity, and I'm thinking 100 years from now, our technology may shift, our cultural attitudes and things may shift, but spiritually we're probably gonna be in the same place.
Yeah.
Because that's usually how that works.
Yes. Thank you.
For me, I think it's about moving the needle in how we see ourselves. There was a show that I wrote and produced called The Boondocks. And comedically and satirically, we really were concerned more about us rather than the perception of how people would see us. And in the work that I do, I try to just portray honesty from my perspective, because there's a lot of different ways, everybody has their own form of how they see themselves. But that hasn't always been the case when it comes to how comic books, movies, TV shows have presented us. So I think the more honest the depiction, the better we will see ourselves and hopefully feel about ourselves when it comes to being in these creative meetings. Thank you.
Thank you both. We're going to open the floor up to any audience members who might have questions for our panelists. How much time are we working with? 5 minutes? Okay, so maybe 2 questions. Okay, so over here, yes.
My question is specifically for Mr. Guillory, because I've been reading his work for a while, and I'm just borrowing on my list of
Yeah, that's all right. He's waiting.
Speaking of lighter works, I noticed you did a crossover with Outer Darkness.
Yeah.
So how did you navigate that and kind of put your personality into that part?
Well, for anyone who doesn't know, my first major work was a book called Chew with Image Comics. That was completely unlike any of the stuff we're talking about here. It's completely off the wall, totally escapist. And I worked with the writer was a guy named John Lehman. So after we finished Chew, he went on to do a book called Outer Darkness. And it's all about relationships. So like one day he just texted me and said, "Hey, I'm doing this thing. You want to do a crossover?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." I mean, that's pretty much exactly how that happened. But it's, I'm easy to work with. So I mean, and with me and John, we worked together for over 8 years. I mean, it's you just not you set them up and knock them down. It's very easy.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. And then I saw your hand, yes.
Hopefully it's a quick question. I attend a lot of World Cons and World Fantasy Cons, but I've never seen y'all there. I was wondering, do you attend the conventions?
Oh, conventions, yes. Now, I haven't been to WorldCon, but
Yeah.
I do GalaxyCon. I do the GalaxyCon, San Diego, New York, and Fan Expo now. I'll be at all of those, but yeah.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of Comic Cons. I've cut back last couple of years because of COVID, but I'm actually ramping back up again. But I've never been to WorldCon.
Yeah, because I don't tend to go to the comic, I tend to go to the literary conventions, but your work sounds so literary, so.
They don't invite us.
Cool. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, so because the two of you sort of work within a kind of niche genre and like culture and like subgroup. Do you ever have any difficulty like convincing other people, like publishers, agents, or anything like that, to like see the merit in the work or to like get the idea across?
Not yet. For the most part, I've been fortunate. I think the TV work has helped sort of get me into the comic world, and I haven't received a lot of pushback for the subject matter itself. It's been pretty cool.
Yeah, I haven't. I mean, in the early years, I think I did. Just because, I mean, my stuff tends to be pretty quirky. So I think initially there was, is anyone going to buy this? But eventually, after I've had some success, nowadays I don't have any issues with it at all. But I guess I've come to learn that when it comes to publishers and editors, they're not the most visionary a lot of times.
No.
Like I'll pitch something, and oftentimes it's like, I don't know how that's going to work. It's like, exactly, but I know how this is going to work. Just let me do it and just get out of the way. So, but it's got to be.
Cool. We might have time for one final question. Willie, you just pointed at Willie. Yes.
So, mainly, I was also just particularly interested when you were talking about the way that you define horror within, and particularly you were saying a lot of these stories are based upon the distrust of technology. And in my mind, mostly a lot of sci-fi horrors, particularly talking about technology, is about that general distrust. I'm trying to remember how I was wanting to frame the question. No, it's but you also say you just have a general distaste for horror, as correct when I said. I apologize. I'm trying to frame my question though. No, just how would you like sci-fi horror in general? Like, how would you define that term? How would you define like what it's mainly trying to say, or like say that distrust of technology, or is there anything outside of that you'd also define the horror genre as in this context?
Well, I mean, in sci-fi horror, for me, it usually has to do with man's ambitions being way bigger than man's wisdom. Like, usually that's everything.
So like the Jurassic Park idea.
Yeah.
Whether we can do this, whether we should.
Yes. I think mankind is not good at that at all. Usually because it's just, I think it's as simple as like a child who just wants what he wants. And he just, I mean, you just give him a bigger toy and a bigger weapon, essentially, then like he'll do crazy stuff. I feel like a lot of science is that. Like I remember, even before I started in comics, I would just come across these crazy articles. And I remember there was an article about scientists that were trying to cultivate a zombie virus. Just to see if they could. And it's like, why would they do that? Why? And I think that's it in a nutshell. There's just no wisdom behind what they're doing. It's just because they can. So that's my concern. And I feel like I sound like an old man. And I don't mean to. But I feel like a lot of my scientific horror comes from that.
Cool. Thank you. That brings our panel here to a close. Oh, well, we only have like 30 seconds. But they will be, Mr. Barnes.
Yes.
Mr. Barnes and Mr. Guillory will be at the Cavalier tent immediately following this panel. If you all want to purchase books and get them signed by them, they'll be more than happy to. But thank you all for attending. Thank you to my panelists. You all are great. See ya.